we wanted a representative of the community to certainly speak to the issues and what's going on in Europe these days. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over to the Senator and the Assemblyman, and again, thanks all for being here. Gentlemen.
Good morning. I think we're going to first start with a prayer from Father Carroll.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your support. And let's start today, this morning, this beautiful sunny day, with a prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, a prayer for peace on earth. O Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Divine Master, let me not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it's in pardoning that we are pardoned, for it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Thank you, Father, so much for your words this morning. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. It is wonderful to join my colleagues in government and in the Ukrainian community right here in Yonkers. A little over a week ago, the Russian army launched an invasion of Ukraine. This is probably the most egregious and unprovoked act of aggression against another country since Adolf Hitler sent his tanks into Poland in September of 1939. The entire world, the international community led by the United States and NATO and our allies around the world have since that moment stood up and said we will not accept this act of aggression, and we are going to take every possible step to contain and economically isolate the government of Russia. And that is why we are working now in New York State to support that effort. Last week I announced the intention of introducing the Stop Russian Aggression Act, which would begin the process of divesting the New York State pension fund from investment in companies in Russia and businesses that do business with Russia, and would prevent New York State from awarding any further state contracts to businesses from Russia or businesses that are doing business in Russia. On Tuesday, we introduced the legislation in the state Senate. It is S8446. And this week, Assemblyman Sayegh announced that he would like to carry it in the Assembly, and I am delighted to partner with the Assemblyman to have that bill on the Assembly side and then hopefully start moving this through in Albany. We are faced with a crisis in foreign policy. It is certainly the biggest crisis since the end of the Cold War, and nobody talks to state senators and assemblymen for foreign policy questions. We've got the congressman here for that. But the reality is that in New York State, we're home to the largest Ukrainian community in the United States. My own family, 120 years ago or so, came here from somewhere on what's now the Ukraine-Belarus border, what was that point Tsarist Russia. And it's a personal thing for me to some extent as a result of that, but I think for people of good faith and freedom-loving people all over the world, it is a personal thing right now, because we see an innocent people defending themselves against a brutal invasion. We see war crimes being committed. We see nuclear power plants coming under attack, cities being bombed, houses being destroyed, people being killed, and the entire world standing up in revulsion and saying that this will not stand, and we are going to isolate and degrade and sanction Russia's economy until they realize that they must pull back and restore Ukraine's sovereignty. So I am happy to be here with my friends in government and in the Ukrainian community, introducing this legislation, and we will do in New York whatever we can to try to deter and punish the aggression from the Russian Empire. Thank you so much to everybody who is here, and I'd like to turn it over to Assemblyman Sayegh.
Thank you very much, Senator. This is indeed crucial, not only for our community here in Yonkers, New York, the entire state and the nation, and actually the entire world. This is really illegal action that the government of Russia took in the invasion of the Ukraine. This is an international crisis And for us here in our state and our community, we are in solidarity with our Ukrainian American brothers and sisters. You know, we're very concerned that this crisis that has caused an enormous amount of harm, damage, and suffering to the people of the Ukraine is really symbolic of our history, of our darkest part of our history. And it is crucial now, more than ever, that we unite together to send a very strong message to stop this invasion, to end the war, and to really bring back democracy and peace to the Ukraine. And this is a small step, but a very meaningful step. The Stop Russian Aggression Act that would be supported and initiated by our colleagues in the State Assembly and Senate to send a message to the Russian government that this action would not be tolerated. So I join with our representatives on the local, on the state, on the county, and federal level to stop this aggression. And this legislation would do just that, because the harm, the economic harm that this would impact on Russian-owned businesses and Russian business firms would be tremendous. So I'm very glad to join with Senator Elijah
Reichlin-Melnick.
to really sponsor and push this legislation forth. So at this time, I'd like to call upon our U.S. Congressman, and that's where foreign affairs starts. Let's call on our Congressman Jamal Bowman.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Assemblyman, for your leadership on this issue. We have to stop Vladimir Putin at all costs. And one of the first steps in stopping Putin is to completely divest in all Russian goods and services and completely choke off their economy. That includes sanctions, that includes seizure of assets, that includes seizure of the assets of the oligarchs that surround Putin. That includes their children. That includes their boats, their planes, and whatever it is they have. We should not be importing any Russian goods into our economy any longer. Not here in this state, not across the country. Completely choke him off economically and force him to the table to stop this war and get us to a diplomatic solution. Just this week in Congress, I met with the ambassador who met with the Ukrainian caucus, which I am a part of. And this is what they are asking us for. Not only for us to continue to send arms for them to defend themselves, and let me just recognize how strong and courageous and brave the Ukrainian people have been in defending themselves. They are taking up arms, whether they are a part of the military or not. So they asked us to continue to send them arms so that they can defend themselves. They also asked us to send them humanitarian aid, which we have been doing as well, to support the humanitarian crises that is also taking place now in Ukraine. 1 million refugees have already been identified. That number might double, triple, or quadruple going forward. So it is not just a military crisis and a crisis of democracy. It is a humanitarian crisis that's taking place as well. What's also key is this is not just the United States responding to this war and this conflict. This is our NATO allies as well. They have also sent arms. They have also sent humanitarian aid, and we commend our NATO allies for doing just that. Some very specific reports. Today, I am going to be sending out a bipartisan letter to urge President Biden to grant Ukrainians humanitarian parole at the border. We are collecting signatures, and that letter should be going out today. As you've heard, the federal government granted temporary protected status for 18 months to Ukrainians, allowing them to seek refuge in the United States. We were part of a bipartisan letter that helped to get that done. We've also authorized $350 million in military and humanitarian aid, as I mentioned, and are working to deliver more funds. This is constant, and this is ongoing to help the Ukrainian people to defend themselves. But again, we are hoping that our economic posture and approach will force Putin back to the table, because he has isolated himself. And he did not think that he did not know that this action would lead to the collaboration that's happening with NATO. He thought we were vulnerable and not working together, but what we have shown him is that is not the case. So we're going to continue to stand with the Ukrainian people, continue to do whatever we can at a federal level, and I'm just happy to be representing Yonkers and stand with the local Ukrainian community here and all of my elected colleagues who have stepped up from the very beginning. God bless you, and I'll stick around for any follow-up questions at the end. And let me bring up Senator Shelley Mayer to say a few words.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you. You know, last week, the Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, this is her district here, and she has represented, along with myself and my colleagues, this very robust Ukrainian-American community here in Yonkers. We met with representatives of the Ukrainian community here, and they said the number one thing you as state legislators can do, make sure that you take every step to divest any pension investment, to remove any contract with any Russian-owned business, that you do everything within the state's power to make sure we are not connected or supporting any Russian-owned entity. And credit to my colleague, Senator Reichlin-Melnick, for putting together a very robust bill, and for my colleague, Assemblyman Nader for co-sponsoring it. I am a co-sponsor as well. We heard what they said. We are not going to rely on representations. We appreciate the governor's executive order and the comptroller's conversation about divestment. We want a law to say that New York cannot, should not, and must not invest in anything that is Russian-owned or Russian-controlled. And that is why we are going to push forward on this bill. I am confident we can get it passed in both houses, and we can make a change that will serve not only the people of Ukraine, but our Ukrainian-American brothers and sisters here in the United States, to show our complete and undivided support for every step of this war. And that's what it is, a war. We are on the right side, Putin is on the wrong side, and in the end, Ukraine will win. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. You know, earlier today, Senator Shelley Mayer stated, communicated with Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who totally is on board, supports this initiative, couldn't be here today, but I wanted on her behalf to really join in this effort, this most worthy and crucial effort. I'd like to ask representing county government, Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins to come up.
On behalf of County Executive Vladimir and all of our county residents, we are here, and County Legislator David Tubiolo, want to make sure to recognize him as well. We are standing strongly and behind our state legislative colleagues, our Ukrainian community, and everyone that has been of goodwill to be trying to stop this particular war, incursion, and making sure that we do everything possible. As Congressman Bowman said, we are all working together at every level of government, but we are in the county level supporting our state representatives, Reichlin-Melnick, and certainly Assemblyman Sayegh, our great friend, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the leader, Shelley Mayer, and all of us, to try to get to the particular position to make sure that we do everything possible, as our Ukrainian community has asked us to do, economically and moving forward. From the county perspective, whatever things that we can do, we are going to do. So we are carefully watching and supporting and asking everyone in our state legislature to move this forward and to make sure it is a law. It's not just the goodwill of the governor and moving forward. And Governor Hochul is taking the strong steps. Controller Tom DiNapoli has also made sure to do those assurances. But again, those laws will make sure that none of this can happen, to make sure that we are choking every point, to make sure that the people understand that this is a tremendous, tremendous, difficult economic and democratic situation that we all need to stand up for. So we're here together with all of our family to stand up for our Ukrainian brothers and sisters in Yonkers, where we are super strong behind all of our family here in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Executive Jenkins. I'd like to also, we have County Legislator David Tubiolo to say a few words.
Just want to reiterate everything everyone said, and simply glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes, and thank you, and we will win this war. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. We'd like at this time to call upon for a word of remark from the President of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, Mr. Jaroslav Palisade.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. As President of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, Westchester, New York branch, let me give you a quick synopsis of what we do. Since 1940, UCCA, the Ukrainian Congress Committee, has enabled the Ukrainian American community to generate the political capital and momentum needed to aid the people of Ukraine. Why are we here today? We're here to pray for peace. Is that enough? I think as God-loving persons in an integral part of our it is an integral part of our existence, but it may not be sufficient in this scenario. We have seen that Putin and Russia have decided that they want to put back the Soviet Union with their actions, an unprovoked attack on a free and democratic Ukraine. You've all seen the images on TV and the internet. They are horrific. Families are being torn apart. Innocents, women, children, and civilians are being targeted and killed by this madman and his accomplices. We hope that the outrage that the world is expressing, including in Russia, can stop him and his terrorist activities. Russia should now be added to the list of state sponsors of terrorism, because that's what it is. This is not a reunification of Russian-speaking people to the homeland. It is not a liberation of Russians from a Nazi regime. If Russia is saving Ukraine from a genocidal regime, then why are all fleeing to the west and not to the east? Ukraine is a democratic country with a president that was elected not in a fake election like Putin, but in an election that voted him in with 70% margin. Rabbi Bleich, Chief Rabbi of Ukraine, has issued a statement affirming the Ukrainian Jewish community's solidarity with Ukraine's government and armed forces in defending Ukraine. The statement from Rabbi Bleich has additional significance, however, given the lies that Russian leader Vladimir Putin has again come up with to try to justify aggression against Ukraine. The Kremlin has claimed that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is aimed at the so-called demilitarization and denazification of the country. Chief Rabbi Bleich tweeted, "The Jewish community is an integral part of Ukraine and stands with Ukrainian people, government, and armed forces in defending Ukraine. The government of Ukraine has stood by the Jewish community since Ukraine became independent in 1991. He then added, it has defended and befriended the Jewish community. I don't need to remind you that the President and former Prime Minister of Ukraine are Jewish. NATO states that a no-fly zone would be an unacceptable escalation with Russia. Does that policy still stand if Putin goes full-scale like he did in Aleppo, Syria, and Grozny, Chechnya, where he killed the innocent civilian population to gain control of these areas? Is there a fixed body count of civilian Ukrainians where NATO changes its mind? This is already considered a genocide. Are we going to wait until all hospitals, maternity wards, and orphanages get destroyed? I hope not. Here's what you can do as American citizens. We ask and have been receiving bipartisan political support. Reach out to the White House, your senators, your representatives, and major news outlets. Tell President Biden and the U.S. government to stop purchasing Russian oil.
That's right.
It is morally indefensible.
That's right.
We need urgent military air dome defense systems to protect Ukraine's airspace. We need extensive support with lethal military defense equipment. We must remove Russia from the UN Security Council. International courts must condemn Putin and adopt procedures to sentence Putin as a war criminal and for crimes against humanity. We must block Russian airlines, sea cargo, and other companies from using airports, seaports, and international trade routes around the world. Social media networks must ban communication coming out of Russia. We must impose more sanctions against Russian politicians, oligarchs, and others who openly support Putin. We must reduce the credit rating of Russia and all Russia state-owned sponsored companies to junk status and remove them from all SWIFT transactions, not just some. In addition, we must boycott Russian products, Luke oil gas stations, Russian vodka such as Russian Standard and Stolichnaya, and any other Russian product. As a start, each of you today can go to a bar and restaurant that you frequent and ask the owner or manager to remove any Russian vodka in solidarity with Ukraine and its people. It also seems that we may have to stop drinking Coca-Cola products since they've decided not to stop doing business with Russia. We ask that you join Ukrainians and their supporters locally, nationally, and around the world during their demonstration. For God's sake, all companies and individuals must immediately shut down all operations in Russia. U.S. companies must stop profiteering in a pariah state that murders innocent women and children and attacks a nuclear power plant in 21st century Europe. Donations are allowed to numerous organizations. The Ukrainian Congress Committee has chosen two. We have our own humanitarian aid program. It's ucca.org. That's ucca.org. From our national parent organization, which has a humanitarian aid program through the UN and NGOs, which are now providing humanitarian assistance through Poland. rsukraine.org, that's Revived Soldiers Ukraine, which helps rehabilitate soldiers that have had injuries during the war and also provides humanitarian aid. Finally and lastly, pray for Ukraine. On Sunday, we had an auto rally from Yonkers to the Russian diplomatic residence in Riverdale. At that rally, Rabbi Avi Weiss said it best, "Today we are all Ukrainian." And in the words of the most famous Ukrainian poet and bard for freedom, Taras Shevchenko, "Boritesya poborete." In translation, fight on because you will win and you shall overcome. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to acknowledge the presence of Andrei Burchak from the Suma. Thank you. And also Roman Kazeki. And the Kazeki family have been extremely visible and active in not only the Ukrainian American but Yonkers community for some 40, 50 years here, right, Roman? And also, just to restate, many of us here joined last Sunday Mass at St. Michael's Ukrainian Church in show of solidarity and support. And today we go a step further. So it's beyond just showing support and solidarity. It's really taking action. Action against aggression. And this is what this is. And this is, as the speakers have stated and our representatives have stated, this is an action to stop aggression. An aggression that is unjustified, that is illegal, that is unhuman. And today is really a very important mission on our behalf, the Senator and I, and all our colleagues in the Assembly and Senate, to truly take an aggressive action that will restrict the development and further business growth of Russian-owned products and businesses, so that we hope in New York State, not only would this be the decisive force, but other states around the nation would take notice of what New York has done. That's right. And when this becomes a national effort, this will cripple the Russian movement, whether it's business or militarily. And as the congressman stated, this is what needs to take place to encourage diplomacy and put an end to the bloodbath. Thank you for all who are here, for your presence, your support, and let's continue to work together to put an end to this crisis and bring peace and democracy and independence to the Ukrainian people. Thank you very much.
Take one question.
Sure.
I have a question here from somebody who's watching live, and this question goes more for the congressman who is at the federal level. We're seeing reactive to what's going on. People are asking, what if we had done something proactive? if Ukraine had been accepted in the NATO, one attack on Ukraine will be an attack on all of Europe. Why didn't we, United States, did something before this mess happened?
Well, those conversations were happening. There were many conversations happening with Ukraine regarding entry into NATO. That was one of the things that led to Putin deciding to take this offensive, because the relationship between NATO and Putin, as we know, is very strained, and he has been concerned, quote unquote, about NATO being right next to his borders, which is one of the things that led to this insurgence. Putin doesn't want Ukraine with NATO. Those conversations were happening, as well as other conversations, and that's ultimately what led to this. But you're right. We have to do a better job in our overall foreign policy to make sure it never rises to the level of this level of violence. Our foreign policy needs to be re-examined and reassessed in a variety of ways so that it never gets to a point where a peaceful, democratic nation like Ukraine can be attacked by a madman.
Because this was something that everyone could have seen coming for years back when Russia invaded.
Well, Putin is a tyrant, and he's he's a dictator. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, he's been trying to reunite and put it back together. In his mind, he's living nostalgically through the history of the former Soviet Union, but he is wrong, and the world has moved forward away from him, and that's why it's important now to do everything we can to isolate him, to choke off their economy, so that we could get to a diplomatic solution.
Congressman Bowman, while you're up there,
Yes.
I'll just steal you while you're there now.
Yeah.
Gas is on the top of mind of so many people, and I saw you clapping when our gentleman there came up and he said, let's cut off Russian oil. You clapped, you supported it. So
Yes.
what's your statement on that, and how will you push that at the federal level to cut off Russian oil coming into the United States?
So those conversations are beginning. Leadership is not ready to make that decision just yet, but those conversations are beginning, and people like myself and others are having those conversations. We can import oil from Canada, which will help ease some of the rise in costs that will happen here. But polling shows that the American people support paying a few more cents at the gallon, if that would help to end the conflict that's taking place in Ukraine.
And that's why you support it as well?
Oh yeah, I support it before the vote because I believe we have to completely choke off the Russian economy in order to bring Putin back to the table for a diplomatic solution. It's really unfortunate because the people of Russia are hurting as well right now, and they're fleeing the country themselves because of the decisions of one dictator.
Gotcha. And that was actually going to segue into one of my questions. Are there any worries of backfires with all of these pushes to cut off Russia? Is anyone worried of backfires happening within Russia?
Within Russia?
Like for the people within Russia being upset with all of these actions. Are there any concerns of backfires?
I suspect that they would be upset, but I think that the point is that they need to realize that as long as they have a madman like Vladimir Putin as their president, there will be consequences for Russia, and we would encourage them, I would, and I think many people, think about what it's going to take to try to press for change. Russia, unfortunately, has suppressed dissent for so many years, and I think people there have gotten used to simply getting out of politics and not speaking up. This is the time to be brave and to speak up.
Okay. Senator Mayer was kind of talking on it before about Hochul's order. How does this legislation differ from that or bolster that?
So I'm really grateful to see the governor stepping up and issue an executive order, and Comptroller DiNapoli started the process as well of instructing the pension fund to not make any new investments in Russian businesses. The key difference is this: the governor's order and the comptrollers speak to Russian-owned and operated businesses. This legislation speaks to those and any business that is doing business in Russia, even if it's an American company. Reference was made to Coca-Cola, for instance. And so if Coke has massive operations in Russia, they too would fall under this legislation, which they would not under the governor's executive order.
Any idea on the amount of those businesses who would kind of be impacted by this?
We're still trying to figure that out. I know on the pension side, the controller estimates that the pension fund has about $110 million of investments in Russia currently, and so that's at the state level at the pension fund. And I think a lot of it's sometimes initially difficult, and the invasion's been underway for only a little bit more than a week, and there's a lot of information we're trying to gather. But we want companies to have to make a choice. If a company right now tried to go open up a business in North Korea, they would face consequences from the U.S. government. We isolate, we sanction, we treat North Korea like an outlaw state. Same with Iran to mostly the same degree. And my opinion, and I think that of many, is we should treat Russia the same way as long as they're waging war on Ukraine.
I know this legislation is pretty new. Bipartisan support or no? What are you hearing from your colleagues at the state level?
So yeah, the legislation in the Senate was introduced just 2 days ago. We're collecting co-sponsors. You heard Senator Mayer say she's signing on. Yesterday afternoon, I sent a letter to the Comptroller's office, which did have bipartisan support.
Of course, all the cards are coming right now. Sorry, continue your train of thought.
We do believe that this has significant support. Yesterday afternoon, I sent a letter to the Office of the State Comptroller, which was signed by 30 of my Senate colleagues, a bipartisan group, that's nearly half the state Senate, urging the Comptroller not to even wait for our legislation, but to start the process of divesting right now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Okay, thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for organizing this. Yeah.
So you got to come by uniform. Are you going to come to the reunion?
Exactly.
Oh, no. Thank you.